All right, everyone, welcome. We're going to take a look at the second episode, I guess we can call it, of Helping Beginners. All right, so the video we're checking out is by this user here, Geese, or G's. I don't think it was said at the beginning of the video here, but there you go. You can see it on screen, Geeze. And this video was posted 9 months ago, so we're talking September, October, when the whole Unity fiasco was going down with their change in the terms of service. All right, so I'm assuming, based on this, that they are new to the engine and not necessarily new to game development in general, but I could be mistaken. Take it back, and let's go.
I've been developing games as a hobby for the last 6 or so years, and in that time, all of my experience has been with Unity, a massive name in the development scene, and really great.
Oh, and if you're new to the series, if you didn't see the first episode, what we do is we go through, we watch the video sped up, of course, and anything that could be corrected, suggested, or maybe some kind of misinformation or ignorance just with the engine itself, we can go ahead and correct that as we go along. So we'll see with them, I believe, having experience already, what it is that they do have any struggle or issues with.
Great, robust engine to work with. And recently, I've been working on a new project and video, and it's going really well, so just look out for that one soon. But if you've seen the news recently, you would have seen Unity's questionable business decisions that are just pushing developers to seek out other platforms that can hopefully replace them. The other big name in the game engine space is Unreal Engine, an engine that's been around for decades and is the foundation of so many games, and it's a feature set for basically anything you can imagine. So why not give it a go? Well, the first thing that puts me off Unreal is my fear of C++. I've made a couple projects in Unreal before, but the fact that I can't work with C++ anywhere near as well as I can with C#, it just means it's another learning curve to the process.
Yeah, and any amount of learning curve that you throw in, or the more learning curves that you throw in, the less attractive the option would become. So if he's got to learn Unreal Engine as a whole, as well as C++ here, and then in addition to that, try and figure out how to do 2D with Unreal, because I believe they removed the template that they had. Of course, that's assuming they go with Unreal 5, I believe, is when they took it out. But continuing on.
It isn't necessarily bad, but it's still something to consider. And another reason,
Yeah,
according to the most reliable sources like Reddit, Unreal isn't the best of 2D games, which is what I usually focus on. So that really doesn't make
that makes sense because Unreal, it was made for, was it shooters? Right? First person shooters, and that's generally where it's going to excel at. And 2D, without some kind of template already in there, I hear at least that it is a lot of work to get going when you don't have that template to work from.
make any sense if it's not suitable. And before I get hate by Unreal users, I know it has a great feature set for 2D, I know it's there, I know what Paper 2D is, and it's definitely fine for what I want if actual professionals can do it. But anyway, moving on. So looking at the other options, one emerging engine that's been framed as a Unity replacement is Godot. Godot is a free, open source alternative that's been highly praised by some indie developers, such as DevDuck here on YouTube. So let's give it a go. What I plan to
And it's continuously gaining popularity year after year and getting more users.
today is make a project in Godot, which sounds pretty easy, but I don't know anything about Godot and I've never seen the engine before. So let's get started. I'm going to head to Godot's site and just download the engine. One of the nicest developments with Unity is actually the inclusion of Unity Hub, an amazing manager for all your projects, installs, and learning material. Godot doesn't really have this, you just install the exe for the engine, but as this is the open source community driven option for game engines, there are people making these features for them, so I'm on GitHub and found a couple of options, but to be honest, these are rather clunky, and didn't really offer what I was looking for, so it's just a simple exe for me. When you first open Godot, project list.
Yeah, personally, I don't really care about these managers myself. Normally, I just have them pinned at the bottom of my taskbar. I have the newest version for the Mono or .NET, whatever, right? And then maybe I'll have the beta of the next one down there to mess with. And anything other than that, I've got the Steam version, especially since we just use GDScript on, or mostly use GDScript on this channel. I can just go into Steam and select any version to go back whenever I need to swap to different versions. So it's not that big of a deal for me for these managers, but I can understand the appeal.
List comes up. So I'm going to create a new project, and for this, I'm going to try to develop a simple
especially if you don't know what version a project was made in, and for some reason you don't want to look at the project file, which tells you.
Tower defense game using the assets for my current project as a base, so I'm just focusing on the engine itself. So let's get started. The feeling I first got when I opened Godot was such a weird one to me. It gives me such a sense of familiarity with it all. I vaguely understand what's what, but at the same time I have absolutely no clue what I'm doing.
Makes sense since the UI does have that. Well, you do have that familiarity with Unity, right? You know what the. Well, you can assume what history is. You know what the inspector is, so you know what's going to be over there. Obviously, you know what the file system is, even if it's not at the bottom, which you can do now. And the scene, I would assume that you would put together, that would be your scene hierarchy, which again is normally on the right, I believe, by default on Unity.
I could try and mess about randomly until something happens, but instead let's just hit up the learn section on their website to see what I can do. One of the great things that Godot do is to shout out the community members for their tutorials and documentation. And one of the most prevalent sources of learning material is GDScript, who have a website and YouTube channel filled with everything needed to get started with Godot. So I'm going to take the time to watch these through to see if I can make any sense of this engine.
Alright.
And after trawling through some of the beginner tutorials, I started aimlessly throwing things together until the game appeared. So
you've got a couple issues down there in the debug. I'd be curious to know what those are.
In Godot, objects are referred to as nodes. The scenes or levels in the game are also just nodes, and are the ones at the top of the hierarchy. And the editor prompts you to create a new scene node on the left here when none exist. So by creating a 2D node, we now have a first level in our Godot career.
Yep, everything is a node, and your scene is just a bunch of nodes together.
If I then drag the levels right into the scene, it adds the hierarchy, and there it is. The first thing I noticed that always happens with pixel art is that its scaling is all wrong because it's using some algorithm that isn't the nearest neighbor, which makes it look blurry and weird. This setting was actually not hard to find at all. In the inspector, under texture, there's a filter option, and nearest is in there. So I just set it to that, and it's all good. I have no idea how to do this by default though, which is a bit of a pain in the ass, but
just set this up by default. Perhaps you set this up by default, you'd have to go up into your project settings, and you would find it in here. I don't know if you need to put advanced on, probably not. We just type in the word filter, and we see rendering, textures, and right here we have the default texture filter. You can just swap that to nearest, and now every texture that you bring in is going to come in with that nearest filter already applied. You're not going to have to go into the inspector and change that. Let's continue.
In the inspector, I can see settings I'm used to, like rendering order, which amazingly has Y sorting as a little toggle. It's such a useful feature in 2D games. I can't see any way to sort with layers like Unity have, so I have no idea. One thing that really confused me.
I mean, you kind of have layers right there in your scene hierarchy, right? Depending on the order that you go in, just like with things like Photoshop and that. But you could also break this down into actual tiles and use the tile map, or I guess the tile map layer now going forward. And you could break that up into different layers if you want to do it that way. Other than that, yeah, because the Y sort is really going to depend on that origin point.
Is how Godot handles the camera size, which is this blue box you can faintly see in the editor. And by glancing at the tools, I could not figure out how to match the resolution of my sprite to the size of this camera. In Unity, the camera has a projection size, but all I can see in the Godot camera was a zoom, which does achieve a similar result, but it probably isn't the right way to do it.
Yes, if you wanted to change that, just wanted to note that maybe by layer, maybe they're talking about the Z index, which is under ordering. But as for this, you want to change things with the size of this blue area, you can actually just go up into project settings, and that's actually going to be up here at the top under display window. There's your viewport. This is that blue rectangle area that you see. We brought in that camera. Here, camera. We can see we kind of got this purple, pink rectangle area. That's going to be the same size that's been displayed. And of course, that's where you can, of course, do the zoom. Maybe that's what they were talking about, referring to that. Yeah, that's about it. Position, scale, yeah, it's all there. There's your zoom. But the actual thing, if you wanted to create that be the full size, I mean, you'd know if you went into project set, you would know what you're setting your window at, and then you could just go into your transform and set that. Maybe I'm missing something or not understanding something. That's completely possible. Well, all right, let's go ahead and jump back to the video.
Now that I've got the basic level, it's time to set up nodes for the few objects. When making a new node, the engine gives you these different types that are essentially templates for what the object is. For the goblin, peasant, and arrow nodes, I've gone for the character body 2D, which seems to be the best way to go about it. These nodes are designed for moving characters around, so
Yeah, that makes yeah. So static body is going to be your bodies that don't move. Rigid is going to be the ones that act upon physics, right? So forces being applied to us, things like balls. If you're in Skyrim, just put all your objects, right? The fork, cheese, plates, cups, and the character body is something that's going to move with your input.
I assume that's the correct choice. A nice feature I have seen in Godot, though, is you can actually change.
And just to clarify there, you can make a rigid body move with input. You're just going to be applying forces when you input your controls or your buttons.
Change the type to anything else, so when I find out I've done this all wrong later, I can just fix it. For the sprites, it's actually the same approach that I take in Unity, by having a sprite as a child object that purely stores this sprite and nothing else. Now, onto the programming side of Godot. By default, Godot uses a language called GDScript. It's sort of its own language,
Yep.
It's very similar to Python, with relaxed syntax and basic structure. But as I don't program with Python and clearly don't know GDScript, this would be an issue. But luckily, there is an alternative, Godot C#. What I didn't realise is it's actually a separate version of the editor, so I had to go back to the website to download the .NET version and set up again. Luckily though, Godot's engine is tiny, and this takes seconds to do. Now I've got the .NET version of the editor, I need to start Visual Studio to make this all work. In Godot, in the editor settings, you can find the options for external text editor and .NET, so here I just set these to Visual Studio, so when I click on a script, it'll open in VS, instead of the built-in editor. But VS doesn't actually know Godot's features and won't give you suggestions and autocompletes, so once again, heading to GitHub to get this. I found this online, and once it's installed, Visual Studio actually works nicely.
That's interesting because I never installed any third-party anything, and I've always had autocomplete put in. So that one's a little curious for me. I don't know. Maybe I had something installed previously. It kind of worked with that, but I never had to go out and find anything. But let's go.
And now I can see what I'm doing. This is the thing with open source programs. It's like, by default, the setup can be a bit daunting and might be missing features, but assuming the community is strong enough,
I would like to see autocomplete on the built-in editor. That would be nice. But I don't know. I don't know if we will. Probably not.
someone's probably contributed plugins and add-ons to fix this, and so that you can tailor the engine to your liking. One of the interesting things with this game engine is that each node can only have one script attached to it, it seems. So unlike Unity, which has the components that can be stacked onto a single object, here the nodes only serve a single purpose.
Yeah, however, you could put a blank node into your scene or onto your like character body or whatever in order to add more scripts onto it. Or since we're talking about components here, you can go back and you could take a look at my scriptable objects and you can kind of make your components off of that. Right, so you can create your resource that can have your functions that on it, and then you could have that exported onto like your player, for example, like a health component, and then that way all of your health, stats, damage, healing, all that stuff can be kept within one area that you can just call your health component, and then you could check that health component. I feel like I'm saying that a lot. To get the current health, for example, of player or the enemy or whatever, and it's something that you could just drag and drop onto any of your enemies. So that's another way. So using these resources or scriptable objects, if you're coming from Unity, that is another way that you can kind of add more scripts to a single node. Especially if you want to break it down to like their own individual components. But I get that there are Unity people that like to have the gravity as one script and then the movement as another script. And then they'll have, I don't know, something else broken down to its own script and continue on that way. So I can get how that would be quite different, I guess, to think about. Going from there to here. Alright, let's go.
Which I guess makes it easier to sort, as you can't make a behemoth object with a whole pile of components on, but at the same time it just gives you a larger hierarchy with complex objects. So what do I need to do for the game? I need to make the goblins follow a predetermined path, I need the peasants to shoot at the goblins as they go by, the player needs to be able to hire peasants, and the base needs to have a health value, so if the goblin reaches the end of the path, the player takes damage. So, let's start with the goblins. One of the default nodes is the character body 2D, which comes with a code base that allows for movement and physics, so I'll start with that. This class starts with gravity, but as it's a top-down game, I don't want this, so I just deleted those lines of code until all I was left with was the unit moving from a vector 2. Currently, this is really the user's input, but I need to change this to the direction of the next node. So I got most of the basic logic for the path and goblin set up. However, I just couldn't wrap my head around how to get a reference to another class in Godot. In a lot of documentation I've seen, you have to use the path directly, which seems kind of weird, but even still, it would just error out with this, so I just kept looking. Eventually, I got it to work by giving the absolute path of the node, being root level pathway.
Yes. I do want to note that in the editor, you do have the option. I do want to note for anyone using C#, so that you don't have to keep going back and forth with online documentation. You can actually go into your editor settings under text editor, go to help, and you can actually look at class reference examples. This will be set to GDScript by default. You can just set it to C#, or you can set it to GDScript and C#. Your choice. And upon doing that, you might have to restart the engine. I don't remember. But you'll see any of your code examples. You'll see them like this now. So you'll actually see, you can see the GDScript example and you can see C# examples. All right, just throwing that in because I know some people don't know that that's a thing, and I notice people do keep going back to the online documentation over and over when they could just look inside the engine, even if they're looking for C#. All right, back to the video.
And then using the node as a pathway, which does work, but this node path system just seems a little odd to me. But as you can see, the goblins now follow the path somewhat nicely. At the moment, it's just setting their position instead of using physics, so it's a little janky, but for now it's acceptable. The next learning point.
Oh my god! I just noticed
as a pathway, which does work, but this node path
all those
but as you can see,
debuggers popping up there at the end.
Their position instead of using physics, so it's a little janky, but for now it's acceptable.
That just skyrocketed.
When an arrow collides with the goblin, I needed to take some health away and destroy the arrow.
Yeah.
And when the goblin collides with an invisible trigger at the end of the path, it will do the same for the basis health. Again, this took a little while to work out, but eventually I found this node tab exists, which led me to the answer I was looking for. In the node tab, there's a list here of signals, which act similarly to events in Unity, where you can assign different functions to be called when the signal is activated.
Yep.
And the last use of colliders in the game is to trigger the tower's AI to start attacking the goblins when they get in range, which is all handled with a circular collider. If the goblin is within this collider, it must be in range, and the peasant will shoot at it until it's either dead or left the radius. For the area 2D nodes, they contain a signal for body entering and exiting the area, which is exactly what I needed to achieve the trigger system. So for this, I made two functions in the peasant script: on body enter and on body exit. When a goblin enters the area, it's added to a list. When it exits, it's removed. Simple. This is all I need for the targeting system. And I just use the distance 2 function to work out the closest target, and will then use this in the next steps. When the tower is triggered, it needs to rotate to face the target, which is simply done by grabbing a vector 2 of the direction of the goblin from the peasant, and then using the angle property to set the global rotation. And as you can see, when the goblins go by, the crossbows are rotated towards them, ready to attack. I now need to trigger the attacking of the tower, so that it would just be a boolean to say whether or not the tower is looking at an enemy, and if so, start countdown and attack every time it hits 0.
Sense. Pretty simple execution here.
As I'd already set up the arrow's code of simply moving forward and colliding with the goblins, it's just a case of spawning them in the correct rotation at the crossbow's firing point. To do this, you have to create an instance of the object using the instantiate function. The documentation of this was really hard to find, as in GDScript this is instance, and the C# version seemingly used to be called this too, but I eventually found it. To set up an object, you create a new variable from the instance, set the required position and rotation.
Okay, so I see it's a bit of confusion going from Godot 3 to 4. So it used to be called instance, and now it's instantiate. And it sounds like he found instance when he was searching and looking around. And instantiate was harder to find. But
and then add it as a child. It's a little different to Unity's method, but it's very simple. And now it's just a case of adding the final touches to this little project, such as the enemy spawner with gold values and hiring peasants. So I'm going to take some time to add this, and I'll be back to say how it all went.
oh god, that's a lot of debuggers down there. Right. Oh god, that's a lot of shooters.
Now, I don't see this winning any awards,
Right.
but it's definitely taught me a good amount about Godot's workflow. I can definitely see why
Right.
developers enjoy using it. So overall, how did this look?
Okay, so we got some positives there. You can understand, you can see and understand why Godot devs love this engine or love using this engine.
Experiment go. Will I be moving all my projects to Godot from now on?
Probably not, considering, well, you would have to have hell of a good time in order to just up and change after using another engine for years.
Well, no. While Godot is clearly a great
Right.
toolkit for developers to make great games, I feel a lot more comfortable in Unity, and its workflow just makes a lot of sense to me. Now, obviously,
And that makes sense.
this is massively skewed, because 6 years of experience is a lot more than 24 hours, so obviously going to pick Unity. But hey, I like it.
Makes sense. Now, for me, it was the opposite. Unity was fine, but when I actually swapped over to using Godot, for me, that is what just clicked. That's the workflow and everything that just made sense to me.
Since this whole Unity collapse, I'll still be looking to other engines for certain projects. When Godot's .NET implementation expands with full platform support, the engine I use for my next project might be a no-brainer. And I hope you like this little experiment. Make sure you leave a like and comment down below on your thoughts. What engine do you enjoy using the most and why? It'd be interesting to hear differing opinions, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.
All right, well, there you go. If you like their video, you want to see more of them, go ahead and like their video and subscribe. Of course, the link to this video, to the original video, is going to be in the description right there at the top. Now, to answer that question, what was that there?
Platform support. The engine I use for my next project might be a no-brainer. And I hope you like this little experiment. Make sure you leave a like and comment down below on your thoughts. What engine do you enjoy using the most and why? It'd be interesting to hear differing opinions, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.
Godot is my preferred engine of choice, as well as GDScript. When it comes to language, and that just goes in general, not necessarily with the engine, but of course, if I want to use that, then I've got to use the engine. But I do prefer Godot. I have used many engines. I've used a bit of Unity, Unreal, Game Guru, just about every version of RPG Maker, Wolf RPG, Pygame, App Game Kit, both the classic and studio. Sure, I'm forgetting at least one somewhere in there. But for me, Godot's the one that just works. And like I said, for me, the workflow and everything just kind of clicks on there. It just makes sense. And one of the reasons that I choose to use it, aside from it just making sense for me, is I feel like I can get a lot done in a short amount of time in comparison to any other engine or framework. All right, so that'll do it for this one. We had just a couple small questions for the most part going in, or not going in, but coming right out of this video. But all right, take care, have yourselves a good one. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode on helping these beginners or newer people that are trying out the engine for the first time. But all right, take care, and I'll see you guys next time.